Hi, I'm Ken King, high performance basketball coach, teacher, and the owner and founder of the Boost Institute for Learning, Literacy, and Growth. Welcome to Real Learning with Real People. These are conversations with real people. They're unscripted and they're designed to pull tidbits of information from people who are grinding right now to get the most out of their lives. Using a minimum amount of editing and a maximum amount of authenticity, we want to provide lessons that anybody will find effective, relatable, and entertaining. We seek to have guests that provide learning based on their life experience. Some are chosen because of their experience as high performers in sport, business, or education, and others because I felt they have meaningful lessons to teach and I wanted to make sure they have a platform to share it with the world. The language in the videos can sometimes be mature, as I'm always encouraging my guests to be themselves. It's all part of making sure we do our best to give content that's authentic and effective, and you feel like you can utilize this real learning and connect with these real people. My conversation today is with Meghan Bonhomme. Meghan is a mindfulness and mindset coach, a professor, and an entrepreneur who's currently completing her PhD in higher education. She's dedicated to sharing the power of self-care and self-love through her company, The Lovely Human School. Her mission is to empower humans to feel lovely about themselves and see lovely things in their surroundings so that they can do lovely things in the world. Meghan offers one-on-one coaching, workshops, and online courses to teach mindfulness practices that help humans reach their potential through presence and positivity. When she's not chatting about transforming education in the workplace culture, Meghan can be found teaching yoga at Myoga Studio in Ontario, Canada, sipping tea with her German Shepherd on her lap, or chasing the sun. One of the things I have to say before we get into this conversation is that chatting with Meghan is just so full of genuine conversation and a realness that really makes it enjoyable to learn from her. I know that if you listen to this entire conversation, there's going to be some great things that you can take out of it that can make a big difference in your life. Hi, Meghan.
Hey!
How are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
Good, good. How's isolation?
Isolation is, well, it was a struggle at the beginning. I feel like I'm finding my groove now, but yeah, I mean, we're all in it together, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time on Zoom and on FaceTime and napping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Apparently, Tiger King is this thing on Netflix that
Oh,
everyone's binge watching. I only got through one episode, but
I've I've heard about it. We were actually just talking about starting it tonight, so
okay, good.
we're gonna.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah. All I hear about is people are binging it like crazy. So
I know. Well, I mean, there's tigers, so I guess that's kind of cool.
yeah, yeah. Nobody hates tigers
No,
except
no.
maybe Tiger Woods' ex-wife. Um, so let's just get right into it
Yeah.
and tell me a little bit about you and your past and growing up and that kind of thing and how you got to be sitting here now.
Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking about this and I was like, how deep do we really want to go here? But I think that there are some really big moments in my life that have been very impactful in why I've chosen the career that I've chosen. And, I come from a family of a lot of teachers. There's like education is like, there's the principals and there's the teachers and the secretaries. It's like everybody in education is in my family. And so as a kid, I grew up in a lot of different places. I lived in Toronto, which is like, crazy population for 7 years. And then I moved from there to a fly-in First Nations reserve. And I was the only white girl on the entire in my entire school, and so just like very different education systems. I ended up skipping a grade when I was there. So when I moved from Toronto to Sandy Lake First Nation, I skipped a grade. So not only was I a kid who was born in the fall, so I was already like young and small to begin with, I skipped a grade. So the like kind of claim to fame, I guess, is I started high school at age 12 and graduated high school at age 16 and went away to university in the States at age 16. So had I stayed in the States for my entire university experience, I wouldn't have been able to drink legally
Yeah.
graduating. But thankfully I moved back to Canada after just a year. So a lot of my experiences, I think, in different education systems has led me to see really good teaching and to see maybe not so good teaching, and then to develop who I want to be as a teacher. And so at age 21, I became a professor at a college, which is like, if you think about that now, I'm just like, who did I think I was? Like, what kind of like guts did I have, walking in and thinking that I could do it? But man, I did it. And I've been at Cambrian for 11 years, which dates me a little bit, but that's okay. And so, yeah, I had a lot of experiences. I loved school growing up. I remember being a kid. I feel like all teachers were these kinds of kids where you set up all your stuffed animals and you like make them do math or you make them do spelling.
Totally.
Yeah, right. And then I also thought, this is a fun fact, I also thought that it was fun to invite friends over. And I had this like animal fact, like binder full of like pandas and lions and like all of these facts about animals. I'd invite friends over and want to summarize the fact sheet so that we could like what 8-year-old summarizes and asks her friends to summarize. But that was me. And so I was a bookworm. I loved reading. I was an only child until age 9. So I spent a lot of time in my imagination, which I'm so grateful for, really, because man, I can dream. So just like a lot of learning in my early years, and that really took me through as I went through the system of, doing my Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education. Then I was like, let's do masters, let's do PhD. And so like really driving my own education bus because I just absolutely love to learn. And I always have like 2 courses on the go. Like, I don't know how I still sign up for things. Like, I don't know why. Like, let's learn about energy healing. Let's take a yoga certification. It's just, I don't know. Are you the same way?
Yeah, I think that a lot of my education, I guess, pathway has been trying to pursue new things that are kind of like cutting edge, like things that I'm always trying to think of the thing that people aren't paying attention to yet. And that means that sometimes I'm looking at stuff that maybe is never going to be anything people pay attention to, and it just goes away.
Yeah.
But it's always about trying to find that kind of novel idea or that different thing. And I like to ruffle feathers a little bit too. So I spend a little bit of time in the education world, I guess, disagreeing with people, and people in education don't like that. That's for sure. So, so
No.
you said you were only child till 9. So how many siblings?
So I grew up with 1 sibling and then have 3 others as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what's the
Yeah. So
family
my little
dynamic like?
sister, okay. So I always just like, she's my baby. Like
Yeah.
I thought she was mine, like this little thing came into the world and it sort of became my big focus. Like I just was always reading to her and playing with her and teaching her things. So this is like the real teacher in me. I think if you're meant to teach, you're just always teaching. It's just like kind of who you are.
Cool.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I loved being an only child, but I definitely loved having a little sister who I could, I always wanted a big sister. So the next best thing is becoming the big sister that you always wanted to have. And so I really tried to support her and offer as many life lessons. And I still do. She probably hates it, but she does hate it. She also pops on. She's going to kill me for this. Anytime I go live, anytime she pops on and has like the weirdest comments. I'll just be like trying to lead a meditation and she's just like saying things like, I'm hungry, come home. I'm like, what? I'm trying to be serious. I'm an entrepreneur here. So my sister and I have a really great relationship, and I feel really lucky to be able to be someone that she, respects and that she comes to for those life lessons and for advice. So yeah, we've always been pretty close.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what about now? What is your family dynamic look like now? Like in your house now?
Yeah, so I live with my wife now. We're living in Sudbury. We have the best, I wish he would come in here, but a shepherd husky who is like my coworker to the extreme. I'm always sharing, Baxter's reading, Baxter's on a Zoom call. So that's what's happening in our house. And my parents and my sister are now all in Elliott Lake. My sister just graduated from the University of Ottawa and is going to the London School of Economics, hopefully, in September
Wow.
for her master's. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
Is everybody in the family academic?
Um, I mean, I would say that I'm probably the most academic. My mom is super well read. She can read so quickly. Like, that woman pumps out books. My grandma's the same way. My grandma reads like 3 books a week. Mind you, she's retired, so
We all
she has
are
a little
now.
more. She has a little bit more time. But yeah, I would say like we're all pretty big readers in our family, and that was something that really defined me growing up. I always had books as a kid, and instead of getting, I still got toys, but like I would get a book as my thing. Like, we would go to the independent bookstore down in Toronto and the beaches. I would get to pick out my favorite Berenstain Bear book. I loved the rhymes on that very first page. So yeah, I would say we're definitely all readers. I'm the one that is probably the most academic nerdy, sort
Yeah.
of like kind of that cutting edge, like on the teetering on the edge of like, this is kind of weird, and being socially acceptable. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, really, what does academic mean in
Yeah.
2020, right? Like, it's,
Yeah, very true. I mean, like, I did 2 years of PhD, and that was at U of T, and that was like hardcore academic, and I felt very out of my comfort zone. I'm a very off the cuff kind of person, and that like transfers into all areas of my life, my teaching, my learning. And you get into a room with people who are like doctors and like lawyers and all sorts of humans who are so well established. I was like, who am I from Northern Ontario, like marching on in thinking that I have something to offer. But I think there's a place for all of us. So
cool.
yeah.
And you mentioned, like, you kind of, it sounds like you had quite a variety of experience in terms of where you lived growing up all the way through to adulthood. And you mentioned that you're married now, and I've met your wife, and she's awesome. And can you talk a little bit about what the dynamic was like in all the different places, or as many places as you want to touch on, in terms of growing up and managing sexuality and that kind of thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So it's always like I mean, I don't talk about it much, but I'm so happy to, because I think that, especially in being married and being in front of people a lot more, it's just a part of my life. And it's something that I think should be put on platforms a bit more, so that people like me, when I was growing up and like didn't even know it was a thing to be gay, like I had no clue, right? I lived in Elliott Lake during high school, and I didn't really know that it could even be a thing. And so I always knew kind of as a kid that I like had an attraction to women, but I didn't really know what that meant, because like, how do you know that at age 12 if you've never seen it or you've never watched movies about it, right?
Right.
Now we're so lucky, like how lucky that kids just have to go on Instagram, put a hashtag in, and they find their people, right?
Yeah.
We're so blessed in that way. But growing up, like I had a high school boyfriend for like 8 years. And so, when I eventually came out of that and then came out of the closet, it was quite a shock to a lot of people. And honestly, it was like a very difficult time for me. But the silver lining in all of that was that I really became a self-care queen, because it was a surprise to my family. It was a time in my life where I finally found my voice, and I was a very agreeable kid. I was a very agreeable human. We call it sometimes like recovering people pleaser, where you're just like, yeah, I'll do that, yeah, I'll do that, yeah, I'll do that. But age 23, I kind of had that rebellious moment of being like, I fucking had it. Like, I just want to be who I want to be. I want to live my life. I want to say the things I want to say. I'd never been like a rebellious kid. So like, I didn't have a drop of alcohol till I was 23, like nothing. I've still never smoked to this day. I'm just like a very, I'm either very brainwashed by my family, or I just had different priorities. I was an athlete, and a very serious athlete. and I just didn't do it. But when I had that moment at age 23, it's kind of like the tantrum that I always wanted to have. And I think that that freaked a lot of people out because it wasn't the norm, right? It wasn't who they thought I was. And inside, I knew who I was. I was just like banging at the fucking door to let me out. And so there were some really difficult years. There was some distance from family. There was a lot of alone time for me to really, build myself back up. And it's like, what happens when everything that you thought gets kind of like swept out from underneath you, right? So being in a long-term relationship, you kind of tend to establish an identity as a couple, right? And so
Yeah.
that was gone. So it's like, who the fuck am I now? And then family, goes, and it's like, okay, who the fuck am I now? And the beauty in it all was that I just got to figure out and be who I wanted to be and say like, man, this is what I stand for. And I mean, thankfully I had support during it, but a lot of it was like me just crying and writing and yogaing and just figuring out what it meant to me and how I wanted to show up in the world. And I had a choice of, you know, bearing this like heaviness on my shoulders, or just saying like, that's not how I want to live my life, right? So enter forgiveness, enter moving forward, enter
Right.
um you know deciding a different way. And I think that that's where my business was born from, like coupled with my experience teaching at the college level, but then also realizing that like we need to reconnect to ourselves, and you can't think that you can rewire your mindset and your programming being disconnected from yourself, right? You need the reconnection first, then you need the rewiring, and then you can revolutionize your life. And so I ended up making that a course. So I would say that my whole experience, like as difficult as it was during that time, man, things happen for a reason, and I wouldn't change it.
Cool. And
Yeah.
would you say, you mentioned writing and yoga were key for you in some of those harder times? Were those your only strategies, or and why did you pick them?
Yeah, well, I've always been a writer. Like, I don't know how many journals I've filled up. And I always find these stories of like when I was 8 years old, and I'm like, man, I think I was like really, like feeling some feels, because I'm talking about like a dog dying and like people leaving. And like, what is this? But I've always been a writer and had an imagination. And so I think also being an only child for so long, it's like the conversation with yourself, right? So like feeling less alone through writing, and it being a really safe way to actually get the ugliness out. Because in Lovely Human School, I talk about moving the shit. Like you can't just stuff it down. And so either writing or moving your body or breathing, you just got to make sure that you're moving it. One of my most recent one is also yelling. So you like go into your car, you
Yeah.
drive somewhere, and you just like scream, bang on the steering wheel, whatever you
Yeah.
have to do to move it. And yeah, yoga came like it was just like serendipity, really. I ended up doing an energy exchange. I had no money really at that time, and I just did an energy exchange. So I worked at a desk for 3 hours, and then I got unlimited yoga. And I remember when I first started, like in child's pose, like fetal position on my yoga mat, and just like tears like puddling on my yoga mat. And like that's how you move it, right? You gotta find a way to come back to yourself. And it was just a safe space for me. And then it stuck in moments of difficulty. It's what I've always come back to.
Right. Cool. And you mentioned energy exchange, and I know that term,
Yeah.
but maybe explain what that was for you in
Yeah.
that moment, because it's amazing to me how few people know what that is. And it's actually, I think it's a concept. If we could figure out to do it more and more parts of business, I think it would actually be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just it's like an exchange of time or an exchange of goods. So I would give 3 hours of my time working the front desk, and then I would get yoga for free. And so people did cleaning at the studio, and then they would get free yoga. People would do the desk and get free yoga. There's just so many different ways. I've used it in my own business, even to like offer my coaching services in order to like get help with social media, or
Totally.
just like a trade of goods, really.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and I've done that a little bit. I need to do it more because the social media thing is not my strength at all. And
I know. It's so time consuming sometimes.
oh yeah, and I love that you talk about writing and reading, because I think that's a great segue into some of the mindfulness stuff, because I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing as well. And I think that as a reader or a writer, you're accidentally practicing mindfulness from a very early age. You don't know it, but especially through writing, I think it's pretty cool how you can learn quite a bit about yourself or reaffirm things about yourself and the world around you by what you're writing down.
Yeah, it's an awesome way to reflect, right? And I think that if we're, I mean, my goal is to be the best human I can be, and that's like an ongoing process, right? And the only way to get better is to figure out, where am I now? What are my challenges, and how can I improve on those challenges? And not all of us have, like, either the ability to accept criticism or the people in our life to be that mirror for us, right? And so sometimes we just got to take it upon ourselves and really take the time to look at where we're at and where we want to go.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. And when you talk about mindfulness and teaching and working with young adults, especially now, as we both do, I think there's probably a exponential increase in the inability to accept criticism, in my anecdotal opinion. Um, do you think that's connected with the, at least perceived, lack of mindfulness in the same demographic?
Yeah, and I think it also ties to self-esteem. I know that in my, so like 11 years of teaching at the college level, there's been a decade of different types of students. So the students that were there a decade ago and the students that are coming through now, what I've seen is the, you know, progressive worsening of self-esteem, of confidence, of ability to think critically. And I think that those are all kind of tied in together in terms of the mindfulness piece, right? Because how can you love yourself if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not stopping and being present and being mindful, right? Because there's so many external distractions that, kids are coming through, and I say kids in like a very loving way, um, that they're coming through just not having those skills, right? They're tied to their cell phones. They're looking to other people to tell them what to do or to model after other people who maybe they should be modeling after.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a huge, huge connection for sure. But that self-esteem and confidence piece affects their inability to receive criticism. I've done a few things in my classes though to help improve that. Um, and I think that as an educator, we need to find creative ways to make it okay. So I call it like the gift of feedback, and we practice in our class. We're like, we're giving the gift of feedback, and you
Yeah.
just kind of make it a game and you model, how do you give feedback, right? In what kind of way? What is your tone like? What is your language like? And then I also make jokes about my own inability to do things. And I ask for feedback as an educator, right? So give me feedback. How am I doing? What's good today? What's not good today? Okay, no problem. Without, letting it cripple me in front of them. I'll cry at home. Yeah, and that's also, and I also, one thing that I say, and I talk to educators a lot because I'm very passionate about people being better educators, because I'm
Yeah,
getting kids in college and it's like, man, what happened to you in high school? I'm telling
totally.
you. And so I just, I'll talk to them in English class. That's a garbage sentence. What is this? This is a garbage sentence. You can do better than this. Let's figure it out. So
Yeah.
that it's not like the expectation that it has to be perfect right off the hop, right?
Yeah.
It's always this like forever improving process. And that's not just in education, but that's like in life as a human.
Yeah, we talk a lot about how your physiology is going to impact how feedback is perceived, and your body wants to get defensive, and you have to start, and mindfulness is one of the key ways to do so, but you have to start taking control of what your physiology does in those moments where you're getting feedback. But one of the questions I ask a lot of athletes and students is, why are you taking that personally? And not in an attacking way, just tell me why you're taking that personally. And there's so many times where they're taking tone or body language or any number of things, and that's what's making it personal. And so they'll blame it on that. They'll be like, well, they yelled it at me. Okay, well, what if I say the same thing to you, but they don't yell it? Well, it was the way they yelled it or the way they said it. And then I say, okay, so if I tell you what you just did was bad, that was bad, do you not feel defensive? It's like, no, I still feel defensive. Yeah, we're wired to take it personally at first, and it's from back in the days where we had to protect ourselves to stay alive, both physically, mentally, emotionally, all that kind of stuff. But we don't need to do that anymore. And so there needs to be that understanding of like, I'm gonna get a pit in my stomach when you tell me that what I just did wasn't good enough,
Yeah.
or I'm gonna start sweating, or my heart rate's gonna go up as if I'm being attacked. But am I being attacked? Is this fight or flight threat, or is this a challenge? And I think, especially going through some of your stuff, it's interesting to me the way that you frame mindfulness in response to really anything going on in life that's not ideal.
Yeah.
Is there a particular way you lean in terms of mindfulness and mindset that you find, it's impossible to say works for everybody, but something that you really believe in terms of mindset and mindfulness that works for many people?
Yeah, breathing. Like if
Yeah.
you're not, I mean, we're all breathing, but um, in my classes, any class I teach, if it's a yoga class I teach, if it's at the college, if it's a Zoom call, we start with breathing.
Yeah.
And so someone who's breathing very shallowly, so it's just like in their chest, they're not getting enough of that like calm, soothing sensation of like what it feels like to fill up and you hold your breath at the top, and what it feels like to just let it all go. And so I think breathing, I do 4-4-4 breathing with my students
Yep.
all the time. I remember one class, they were just like, there's so many rain clouds in that class. I walked in, I was like, man, you guys are so stressed out. Turn the lights off. It's like, you can't get through content if you don't have community. You can't get through content if people aren't ready to learn. And so I've realized, like, why am I even doing this? Like, let's
Yeah.
get you into a better learning state so then we can plow through the information, because me just talking, it's not going to work. So we did 15 minutes of meditation, just breathing, head down, played some music, and they came up and they were just like little floating humans. And I was like, you guys ready to learn? And they're like, yeah. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So breathing for sure. And it only takes 60 seconds really,
Yeah.
to change your state, even less than that if you're, somebody who's practicing frequently. So breathing, hands down, definitely works the quickest and the easiest in terms of like capturing all types of humans.
Yeah, and I love that box breathing technique for I do it a lot with athletes, because as you know, athletes are generally pretty impatient. So they know they want to calm down, and they know and they believe in the concept of breathing in order to change their response to things, but they don't want it to take more than a few seconds.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about box breathing, even just one cycle, just to get a little bit of benefit. Um, that's cool. And so when you talk about, I think it's interesting that you bring up walking into a class. I love the concept of rain clouds. I think
Yeah.
that's, and I think that anybody watching this who works with young adults, college, or continuing ed, university, that kind of thing, we all know that there's so much going on in their lives as adults that
Mhm.
can put stress and pressure on them, that the rain cloud effect, I guess, in adult education is definitely real.
Yeah.
Um, do you find that, because I know I have, that some of those approaches are either literally frowned upon, or maybe you just feel generally like they're frowned upon by other teachers worldwide, or wherever
Yeah.
they may be, who just for doing things, I guess, that like many in that exact situation you just talked about, many instructors would walk in the room and they'd plow through the content, teach it anyway,
Yeah.
and tell the students they have to show up more focused next time if they want to get everything out of the class. So I guess the simple question is, what if any kind of feelings have you had as what I would describe as a bit of a novel approach to your teaching?
Yeah. Well, I've been doing this for like a long time. And at the very beginning of doing this, like it started with, I wouldn't let cell phones in the classroom. Like there were since I started teaching, no cell phones ever allowed in the classroom. And we did it based on like, it's kind of like a mutual respect thing, right? Like I'm not sitting at the front of the class texting my best friend, and I just prepared 2 hours worth of content for you. And so when you're texting like Johnny in the back, it actually hurts my heart. And so I really bring like the humanness into it and saying, why don't you just go to the bathroom? and talk to your person. Like, I don't care what you're doing in the bathroom, but like, if you want to text in the bathroom, go text in the bathroom. But teaching them that like you can't do that in class because it hurts people's feelings or it has an effect on people. When I first started doing that 10 years ago, it was so frowned upon. People are like, you need to embrace technology. You need to bring it into the classroom. You need to do Kahoot. You should be doing Nearpod, jumping on the bandwagon. And I just said no.
Yeah.
Flash forward 10 years later, my dad, who's a principal, who like was a naysayer back 10 years ago, was like, hey kid, I think you're onto something. Like, yeah, I know I am,
Yeah.
you know? So at the beginning, like doing these things, having like a lot of mindfulness and mindset stuff come in, people, I think, were just uncomfortable with it. But I knew that I had made a shift and a change when at my college, one of the kind of like rough and tough trades professors sent me an email and he said, listen, I'm really struggling with my students. They're super stressed and I don't know what to do anymore. It's like I'm teaching, they're not learning. Can you help? And I was like, yeah, Robbie, I will help you, So I think we just have to stick to what we feel we know is right. And I've always had really good intuition and I've seen the reward or how rewarding it is when my students actually learn, right? So when at the beginning of the semester, they do the English assignment and it sucks, right? And then 4 months later, they do the English assignment and they've learned, right? We still were able to do all of that while embedding mindfulness and mindset in the curriculum.
Right.
So anything anybody else had to say, like the proof's in the pudding, like they improved. And we used to do testing, like actual quantifiable testing with their English reading comprehension, and it always improves. So even if somebody were to have said, you're wasting time, I would say, well, what else do you want me to do? They like, I don't know,
Yeah. And
right?
I think really what you're getting at there is it's like taking a microscope and going deeper. If you can learn a little bit more about something as opposed to skimming the surface, it's worth it to go grab the microscope and go down and find out what else is going on.
Totally.
And as opposed to just staring at the surface problem, positive thing, negative thing, whatever. Um, it's kind of like running around with blinders on as an instructor.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I taught the whole lesson and I didn't even have to talk about meditation like you did. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to waste 15 minutes getting them to breathe. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so enjoy teaching with the blinders on,
Yeah.
because at some point, and I think sometimes, and I think we both know a lot of amazing high school instructors. So when either of us are talking about
Yeah.
kids coming
Totally.
out of high school, we're not chirping the high school
No, no.
teachers. But I do think that sometimes it's easy, especially with high school aged kids, to have the blinders on and not realize that because they're succeeding at that moment doesn't mean that skimming over
Yeah.
going deeper into things like breathing and meditation, mindfulness, and the mindset that you approach learning with aren't important, because it'll catch up to them. And I think a lot of times it catches up to them when they're with us at the post-secondary level.
And the thing with that is, like, I was told this by a supervisor of mine, it doesn't matter what we teach anymore, right? My students can learn semicolons on YouTube. My students can find out how to write an essay on Grammarly, right?
Yeah.
So what's the experience in the classroom look like? It's how I'm doing it,
Yeah.
right? And so they need to feel like they belong. They need to feel like they're part of a community that feels safe. And for a lot of students, school doesn't feel safe. They've been squashed before, either by classmates or teachers or just by life. And so adding mindfulness in and making it mandatory for everybody to do it, and as an educator, being able to use your own quirks and authenticity to bring that into the classroom. So for me it works, right? And I say this to everybody, like all the educators that I do professional development with, you got to find your quirk, right? My quirk is that I'm like lunging in the class anytime someone does something, to like take a big lunge. I'm like, yeah, like that works for me. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily going to work for you, but you got to find a way for them to buy into the mindfulness and the mindset, because that's what they're taking with them when they leave. They're not necessarily going to remember how to use a semicolon. And this has gotten me into trouble a few times, but like, I don't really care. When they're ready to learn a semicolon, they'll learn about a semicolon. I just want their experience in my class. to be a good one, and for them to feel like lovely humans by the time that they leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. And I think you're touching on a lot of stuff that's, you probably just named like it's going to look like we planned this, because you probably just referenced like 5 different things that I teach and do a lot of, and probably like 20 different buzzwords that are super important in education and learning today. And yeah, nobody's ever going to believe that we didn't set that up so that you
Yeah.
could you plug everything exactly the way that
Yes.
that
Or we're just
that
onto something.
well, and that's kind of what I guess it all comes down to, is that the people that are doing it one way are all going to see things out one way, and the people who are really trying to get as many perspectives as possible and a full spectrum of what teaching these days, and learning these days looks like, are
Mm.
going to understand a lot more about things like you just said, um, vulnerability. You just said
Mhm.
belonging in the classroom, and I don't know how many times I either know an instructor, or have been in a class as a student, or observing as a coworker, where I feel very confident they don't know everybody's name, and I feel very confident that they've never had a one-on-one conversation with over half the people in the room.
And
And
the thing about that though is that it can be so easy. Like I usually have 200 students this semester, right? I make it my job in the first 3 weeks to know everybody's name. And I'll keep messing up. Maybe like into week 4 or 5, I'll mix up 2 people's names, but that is my job. I get paid, right? In those first few weeks, because what else are, like, we're just starting out, there's no real assignments coming in. It's my job to make sure that I'm setting up a classroom community that actually feels good. So I do icebreakers for 20 minutes at the beginning of every single class for 3 weeks, because if
yeah,
you can develop community in those first 3 weeks, you're laughing for the rest of this semester, right? I'm not having classroom management issues ever,
yeah,
because I spent all this time learning about my students, and they have a dog that looks like my dog, and we've all showed our dog pictures on our phone, and we talk about who lives close to who, and how can maybe go to the movies this weekend together, or go to that concert in February. And I think that it can be very easy for people if you just make it if we all just make it acceptable to take the time away from the content and get back to community, so that students can learn, right? Because you're not going to learn if you don't feel good. You're not going to learn if you don't feel safe. And the way that you feel safe is like knowing your people.
yeah. Well, and I feeling safe. I'm glad you went there, because there's a big difference, I think, to what the minimum standard for safety is, which is like the roof's not going to fall on me,
Yeah.
the building's not going to catch on fire when I go to the water fountain and drink the water, it's not full of lead or whatever, like that. Yes, every school has that level of safety, or I like to believe that every school has that
Yeah.
level of safety, uh, and they should. But the safety in the classroom is something that, and I've and I'm sure you weren't, because I don't really believe in people being born with the skills like you have, um, but I know I wasn't always good at creating community in my classroom.
Mm.
And I in the past I had classroom management problems with adults because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like a switch, as soon as I prioritize that, all of a sudden, like, I don't think I've dealt with a classroom management thing in years. Like I
No.
and it's exactly that. So that came first. And I remember having to kind of justify, like, I'm going to spend the first 2 weeks really, like, we're going to skim content, but we're really going to hammer down into each other. Like, there's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of that. And I am not I can't genuinely lead an icebreaker. Like it just comes
Right.
off like I'm forcing myself to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't. So I
Yes.
don't do icebreakers. But what I do is we share some stuff, and we have a lot more casual conversation, and maybe we end the formal class a little early for a little bit and that kind of thing, and just sit around and talk about life, talk about why. Now I'm teaching in a professional program, so everybody's coming there to be a massage therapist.
Mm.
And so first day of class, and it's anatomy, so super interesting. Um, first day of class, we spend almost the entire class just talking about, like, why are you here? What brought you here?
Yeah.
And then on that day of hearing the stories of, well, I have 2 kids and I'm a single mom, or I
Yeah.
dropped out of school. I dropped out of 3 different programs. Then I went and worked in oil, and then that job fell through, and all the different stories. And the really interesting thing is the stories have a broad, very broad, um, I guess, storyline. Like all the plot is very different in all the
Yes.
stories, but the end game of everybody being in that classroom at that moment together with a purpose,
Yeah.
everybody starts to realize, hey, we're actually all here, and we're more, to steal the line from the Apple commercial, we're more alike than we are not alike.
Yeah.
And the background is super different, but we're all here today because now I want to be this because it's going to help. And almost exclusively it's like, I want to do this because it's going to help me help somebody else, whether it's
Totally.
kids or wife or husband or sick mom, dad, grandma,
Yeah.
like, or put myself through school in another way, like all that kind of stuff. So it's
And
very
at the
cool.
and at the end of the day, I say this like day one, I'm going through the syllabus, right? When shit hits the fan, all you have is each other,
Yeah.
right? So it's going to happen to each one of us. This message is going to happen to me. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to him and her, right? We need to know each other and have each other's back through this because that's what life is, right?
Yep.
And so that's a lot of conversation around like stress management too. Like who can you lean on? And I think in society now, students aren't taught to ask for help, right? They're expected to figure it out for themselves, and getting into the mindset of collaboration is a good thing, right? Like I've got really great skills, and then there's some things that I have challenges with, and so as one of my icebreakers, it's like, what can you offer to the group and what do you need? If you're like a procrastinator and you have like type A personality, like you're grouping those people up,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
next class, you two together.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, we can teach that so that people realize, I mean, especially in this time, like we're so in it together. We're so in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it brings up, I had a student, and she's a single mom, young, 2 kids, one kid with a variety of unique needs, and she ended up having to leave the program that I was teaching at that time,
Oh,
which was really sad. And I pulled her. I remember we talked probably about a week before she ended up having to step away, and I said to her, I was like, hey, you've essentially raised 2 kids on your own, eh? Like, and that's badass. Like, I could never have done what you've accomplished. And now the skill that you learned in doing that so alone and so independently, which is a skill,
yeah,
and being able to kill it, is actually hurting you in the classroom, because now we're at a point where you don't have a chance to succeed in the course,
yeah,
but you've never asked for help once.
yeah.
And so I 100% agree in both young students, like out of high school, 17, 18 year
Hmm.
olds, and in mature students. More and more I'm sitting there saying, like, why wouldn't you ask? Why, like, we can,
Yeah,
there's, I had an instructor in university, and she would always say, like, there's always something we can do. I slept through an exam, like a final. Yeah. They don't like that when you do
no,
that. And I was obviously freaking out. And she says to me, there's always something we can do. Now, that something we can do might not be, you might not like it. Like, it
mm,
might be like, oh, you have to do this massive project and it's due in 24 hours, or, but it's never just done. There's always something you can do. And my default at the time was very much, well, that's not true. Like, at the time I was like, no, like sometimes I'm just going to get screwed, or sometimes there's just like, it's just kind of like, this is life. Like, but even in those moments, approached with the right mindset, there is something you can do. It might not be a like, I call it like a light switch change, where it's just like,
mm.
boom, it's better, but there is something you can do.
Yeah. And it's about being at cause too, right? Like so often we fall into victimhood or excuses because it's easier and it's what our default really is because it's safe and it protects us, right? From like all the icky feelings.
Yeah.
But being at cause and saying like, how am I responsible for this and how can I fix it is, I mean, that's something I want my students and even for myself, right? To be at that state.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you ever go to a dark place?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I call these dark places spirals.
Okay.
And I think they're really great because, spirals have a lot of insight. And I like to phrase it as, this breakdown is really just your breakthrough. So sometimes you got to hit rock bottom, or sometimes you have to go through the shit in
Yeah.
order to figure out, okay, what is that underlying thing that's plaguing me, that's difficult right now, and then you can start to move out. I do like to use self-care though to like kick ourselves out of the spiral a little bit quicker. So it's like a tornado, right? You like see the tornado, and then you think, okay, I feel this in my body physiologically. I'm starting to get sad, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling stressed. And then immediately you go to, okay, what's my self-care recipe? What's something that gets me out of this feeling? Do I have to talk to someone? Do I have to go yoga? Do I have to go pet a dog? Do I have to go do, a certain kind of exercise? Like when we have that knowledge of ourselves, then we can more easily come out of those spirals. But last week I was in a spiral. I was like on all fours crying on my office floor just because I had a lot of feelings, right? But I think it's important that we get our feelings out. And so when you have the tools to manage the darkness isn't as scary.
Right. Totally. And I think so. I know for me, when I have any of those kind of times, I have like an early warning sign, almost
Yeah.
like a weather forecast, like this is coming and you can prepare for it.
Yes.
And I have a like, hey, you've blown it and it's happening now. Like it,
Yes.
and so like my early sign is I'll get my mood, even if I don't express it, because I am one of those people who's very, if you want to call it, good at making sure that my emotions stay pretty level,
Mm,
for better and for worse. But I'll know inside, once my emotions start to pinball a bit,
yeah.
that's a sign for me that something's overwhelming, or
Yeah.
something's just kind of off kilter. And then when I get tired, like when I'm unable to wake up or unable to stay awake or that kind of thing, that's my like, it's too late, man.
Yeah.
You missed the boat.
Yes.
So what are those for you?
um I would say like I've blown it is definitely like crying. When I like find myself like listening to a song and I'm crying, I'm like, I think I'm in a spiral right now. But an early warning sign for me would probably be impatience.
Okay.
So normally, I'm pretty good with, you know, not personalizing things. I mean, like that's not my shit. Like
Yeah.
someone's reaction to me, or like that's not mine. I'm in my positivity bubble. I can tell that that's not on me. It's when that positivity bubble starts to get like poked a
Yeah.
little bit that I'm like, ooh, that kind of hurt my feelings. I'm like,
Yeah.
I think that would be like my weather forecast being like, I'm not taking care of myself. Have I slept enough? Am I eating well? Do I have water? Have I gone to yoga? Have I meditated? And I just go through the whole list of all of those things
Right.
and then do them immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I like that. I think that that's something that, as I talk to especially young athletes now, as they come into university sport, there's so many times where they're reacting to their oh shit moment, like I'm way past, I've blown it, I this has been going on for a month,
Mhm.
months, a year. It's wild how long some of us can push that.
Yeah.
And going back and having people identify their early warning sign it's like, no, I don't have one. Like I don't know how many times people have looked at me and they're like, Ken, all I know is that one day I just can't stop myself from crying,
Yeah.
and that's when I know there's nothing else. And it's like, oh, there's something else.
Yeah. It's so cool. I work with an athlete too, like an OHL team, but then I also work one-on-one with an athlete who's got big hopes and dreams and he's going to make it. I'm just really excited for him.
Yep.
But it's very cool to see the difference between an athlete and a non-athlete, because athletes have much different programming into pushing through things. Right. So rather than dealing with emotions, it's a lot of bottling emotions until, like you say, they absolutely explode. Right. So I love the challenge of working with an athlete, being a past athlete who was definitely unstable as an athlete. It's cool to go in and kind of like pick through to be able to support them and saying like, hey, we have so many tools in the personal development world that actually work for high performance. So like, let's just like see if we can use these in real time.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. If you were to go back and kind of do a quick bit of advice, like an elevator pitch of advice
Whew.
to you as a young female athlete,
Yeah.
or if it's easier for you, just any young female athlete, just that like letter to yourself
Yeah.
when all that was happening. What's that look like?
I would say to love yourself and to listen to yourself, um, and to take care of yourself, and that more isn't always better. More isn't always better, and that the downtime is just as important as the on time. I always talk about this. I've talked about this a lot because I don't run anymore. And, running was I was really good at it, like so good at it. But I just had a really terrible relationship with defeat and competition. And I had no problem competing against males. But when it came to competing against females, there was just this thing I would just like shut down. I was like first in Northern Ontario, and then I would go down south, and I'm like 28th or 30th, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I think a lot of that had to do with me not being okay with me and not loving the whole journey, right? So like the
Yeah.
good days and the bad days, and being really critical. So the loving yourself, the listening to yourself, and probably having more fun. Like have fun. If you are in a sport, you should be in the sport because you're having fun doing the sport. If you're not, get out.
Yeah. Cool.
And not that it's going to be fun every single day, but if your fun days don't outnumber your not fun days, then it's not worth it. It's more damaging, I think, from a nervous system point of view, and a heart point of view than anything. It's
Yeah.
not worth it. You can find another sport. You can find something else that fills you up.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So here's the harder one.
Yeah.
If you had to give some advice or almost beg for one thing that a young male coming up through sport or school or just life in general,
Yeah.
I think, I guess where this question comes from is that I coach women full time,
Mm.
but I really try to coach usually boys, youth, and that kind of stuff in the summer,
Yeah.
because you can be a somewhat of a role model for women as a male, but it's never quite, you're not able to be it to the same level that a female is.
Yeah.
And we all know that, and you can be a great thing for that female athlete,
Yeah.
but there's just going to be some differences there. But I feel when I coach young men,
Yeah.
now I can really step into that role where I get it just that little bit more as somebody who is there.
Yeah.
And so I find that they have a lot of men trying to mentor them and teach them how to be men, quote
Yes.
unquote, how to be men.
Yeah.
And so what I always am curious is, from a female perspective,
Yeah.
what do you want young boys to really get? Like if it's like, hey, that kid, he gets it, what would that
Yeah.
be?
So preface to this, I work a lot with men, right? Like all of my Cambrian students are mostly guys. The OHL team is all guys. So I absolutely love working with guys. And I think given my unique position in sexuality, it works really well because I'm kind of just like a bro. You know what I mean? That's how I
Fair.
feel. I'm like the older sister / bro. And so when I talk to guys, I talk to them probably a little differently than females, but what I would say is like, don't be afraid to love. And whether that means loving yourself or loving each other or loving what it is that you're passionate about. I think, there's still, even though it's getting better, I know it's getting better because I see it in my classrooms, but there's still this hesitation about being soft and vulnerable. But all it takes in a classroom or in a group of guys is one guy to share his heart or to express an emotion, and then all of a sudden it grants permission for everybody else to do the exact same thing. And I have seen this magic in my classrooms, and if we could have more guys just being like, hey, I really love my mom, or, I really love myself today because I accomplished this thing that was really hard. If we could get to that place, I just feel like there'd be such big transformations in everybody, not just in like one particular demographic. So yeah,
Totally.
don't be
Totally.
afraid to love.
I love that.
Yeah.
So now this is probably the hardest one.
Okay.
Trying to bring it down to like one sentence,
Yeah.
give or take. I might
Okay.
allow you to go as high as
I
three
know. I'm
if
such
it's as
a
good as the
teacher.
rest of the stuff you've been saying. But what is the most important part about learning to you?
The most important part about learning is not stopping.
Cool. Cool. That's good.
Yeah.
And please don't explain it. I love that. I don't think it
Yeah.
needs explanation. I think
Yeah.
that's awesome. If you have a t-shirt press, I would start putting that on t-shirts now.
I was like, should we put this sticker?
I say a lot of really like ridiculous stuff that I never want repeated again, but every once
Yeah,
in a while I'll say something, I'll be like, oh, I have to go on Google, be like, somebody else like I must be stealing that.
totally. I don't know if I stole that. I don't think I did.
No, I've never heard that before, and that's some good shit right there.
I think
That's
that is. I think
yeah.
let's just record that. We'll post it up, tag each other.
Yeah, I'll make sure that's your intellectual property. That's
Okay, great. I
it'll
mean, I'm
die.
open to share. I'm a huge collaborator. It's all good.
Yeah, no, it'll never die, and it'll live forever on YouTube and wherever else. So and if anybody ever cuts this up to make it into an auto tune, then
Thanks,
it'll be on there. Yeah.
there.
So where can people, if anybody wants to catch up with you and or
Yeah.
follow what you're doing or anything like that, social media, website, where can they find you?
So I probably post more than anybody in my family wants me to on Instagram. And so you can follow me at the.selfcarequeen. So it's just, self-care queen, which we can all be. Doesn't matter if you're female, male, whatever. We can all just be self-care queens. And then my website is lovelyhumanschool.com. And so
Cool.
I offer online courses there that really have to do with mindfulness and mindset.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and I coached a team that it was the queens. So I was an official queen for like 5 years.
Amazing.
And yeah, I definitely I'm a big advocate for the fact that anybody could be a queen if they wanted to be.
Totally.
Well,
Totally.
I think that this was an awesome conversation. Again, I don't know how many people are going to be able to believe that we didn't script this whole thing, but I think that it was super cool. I learned a lot. I got a couple pages of notes that I wrote down. So, and I'm
Awesome.
hoping that everybody who watches and listens is going to get a bunch out of it as well. And I wish you luck and health through.
Thank you. And thank you for offering this and for really putting, this content into the hands of so many people. I know that at Boost, you're doing such amazing, amazing things. And when we have people like you who are, being leaders and spearheading, it's just like, then that's where the magic is, right? And making a really big impact. So a big thank you to you too.
Well, the collaboration is really fun. It's
Yeah.
it's energizing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, and we'll talk again soon.
Good. Bye.